Then I think the next two interviews, Pinker and then James Emanuel, are really high points. Um, I
Yeah,
give,
absolutely some of the best interviews you'll ever seen from either of them. Steven Pinker, he does avoid certain things for PC reasons.
yeah,
I do think that's a negative on the interview when you asked the classic one about Larry the Plumber, and now this is a question about if the Mona Lisa was in a fire and Larry the Plumber was in there, and both were burning,
yeah,
which one would you save? The Mona Lisa for the sake of culture, or Larry the Plumber who doesn't contribute anything to culture? Now, there's ways to answer that. I actually think one of the best uh, answers from that is Alex Sharamitz, who we'll get to in the written, I mean, in the video interviews, and he basically states that perhaps the human inclination would go towards Larry the Plumber, but the right decision is the Mona Lisa because
yeah.
it progresses culture. So he avoids that. That's a negative on it, but it's such a expansive interview, very concise. You really get into Pinker's mind. Pinker has over the last few years been getting worse and worse. He's
Yeah.
not. I don't think that he's heading into the Richard Dawkins school of bigotry, but he is getting worse as a writer and worse as a thinker.
Yeah,
That latest book that he did, The Sense of Style,
yeah,
is probably his worst book. He has no insight into writing, but he has great insight into the mind, but only on a functionary level.
right.
He
And
gets it to the nth degree, but he doesn't get into the deeper essence of it.
yeah, and I remember Alex reviewed that book, and it would be interesting to if I could have like a debate between Alex and Pinker about that book. Yeah, it's a classic example with Pinker in that book of someone going way beyond their purview. I mean, you're not going to hear me try to write a book about Malaysian lepidoptery. I'm not going to write a book about post-Soviet Romanian politics. It doesn't interest me. I couldn't do it justice even if it interested me. I don't. Well, I probably could, but it doesn't interest me, and it's beyond my care. So why someone like Pinker would write about that and then so totally fail in that book it's amazing to me, and it
The thing
argues
is,
again.
though, if you did a book about a subject that was out of your purview, you would research the hell out of it and get insight into it, and then make a great book out of it. But Pinker just gives these half-assed thoughts. He's in a subject that he hasn't developed any insight into, and yet and some of the examples that I got into this argument online with someone over it, where he was speaking about these two examples that Pinker raised up of good writing. There was one really bad piece of writing. It was just purple prose, and then there was a Richard Dawkins segment. And the clear reason that he put the Richard Dawkins segment out there was simply because they're friends.
And he
He's
agreed with
just
those things.
promoting him. He's just promoting a friend. But the Richard Dawkins one was just as bad in a different way. It was full of cliches. It had
Yeah.
sand grains and all this unborn ghost crap that he was speaking about. And Richard Dawkins was once a great writer, but has since become a terrible writer over the
Well,
last
he
20
was
years or
never a
so.
great writer. He was a good, competent science writer who had
Yeah,
good
he was.
ideas.
He
Um,
was a good writer. He was
but
certainly not a
but
great
I
one.
remember the thing you're talking about. It's Pinker tried to say that because in his metaphor, Dawkins made the sand grain specific to Arabia or something, that it somehow undercut the cliche. He didn't have any clue about what really undercuts a cliche. What that did was, by adding that specificity, it made the cliche stick out like the proverbial sore thumb even
Mm-hmm.
more. So it actually highlighted it. The very thing that Pinker thought undercut the cliche actually made the cliche more highlightable and worse. And that showed that Pinker doesn't understand the mechanics of metaphor and what is a good metaphor, what is a cliche, because a cliche isn't just a bad saying. It's just, a cliche is a familiar saying used in a familiar trope in a familiar way. It has to have those three categories. The familiar, a bleeding heart, used in a familiar setting, say a love poem, in a familiar way, say after someone has broken up. So you have to have those three things for something to be a cliche.